but being made new sounds awful good to me. And I think part of that process of being made new is healing, which brings us to our message today, entitled Immediate Healing versus Delayed Healing. And when we talk about healing, there's a lot of questions. And one of the things that I get asked a lot is, why doesn't God heal everything? Why is there still cancer in the world? Why are there people suffering? Why are good Christians dealing with things that shouldn't be? You have people who do good and godly lives, and yet they have pain. You have people who do good and godly things, and yet they fight deadly diseases. And I think sometimes we get a little bit, I don't want to say annoyed, but we get a little bit perplexed by why God doesn't heal these things. Why doesn't He make them right? From our human perspective, it doesn't seem right, and I'll agree. It doesn't seem right. And I think it's a valid question. So I think as we look today, we're going to look at healing and God's way of doing it, and perhaps come to an understanding, maybe more like God, of what He does with healing. And there is a few misconceptions about healing, one of which is that God can't instantaneously heal everybody. My friends, if God chose to do it today, every illness, every pain, everything could be healed with just the moment of thought from God. He is not limited by anything we are noticing. The only limits that God has are the ones He self-imposes upon Himself, which is things like God will not lie. God is incapable of lying because God has placed that restriction upon Himself, that He will not lie, so that He cannot lie. But everything else, God has the ability to do. So if He has the ability, why doesn't He? And I think if we want to have an answer to that, perhaps we might want to look at two of the healings that Jesus did while He was on this earth. And hopefully they will give us some insight as to just exactly why those questions are they are. The first verse we're going to go into is John 4, verses 46 through 53. And we're talking about Jesus, and He says, "So He came again to Cana in Galilee, where He had made the water into wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. And when this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea of Galilee, he went to Him and asked Him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, 'Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe.' And the official said to him, 'Sir, come down before my child dies.' And Jesus said to him, 'Go, your son will live.' And the man believed the word of God. Jesus spoke to him and went away. And as he was going down, the servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour that he began to get better. And they said, 'Yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him.' And the father knew that that was the hour when Jesus had said, 'Your son will live.' And he himself believed in all his household." Jesus not only immediately heals this son, but He does it from a distance, showing His power and His ability to heal. And I think sometimes we fixate on certain things and go, that's the way He does things. That's it. There you go. God speaks it, it's done. And that would be great, except the Bible shows us other examples. And Mark 8, 22 through 25 is another healing, but it's a different type of healing, if you will. And it says, "And they came to Bethsaida, and some of the people brought to Him a blind man and begged Him to touch Him. And He took the blind man by the hand, led him out of the village, and when He had spit on his eyes and laid His hand on him, He asked, 'Do you see anything?' And he looked up and said, 'I see people, but they look like trees walking.' Then Jesus laid His hands on the eyes again, and he opened, the sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly." Now, in Mark, we have a completely different healing. It comes in stages. It involves more activity than just speaking. And I don't believe that the spit is integral to the healing, although there probably are some significances to it symbolically that I'm not going to explore at this time. But there is a difference and a more delayed healing in this type of situation. The one thing you have to understand about God is there's no one blanket way of doing things in healing. There is no one way of doing things as far as God says, this is my standard operating procedure. If you've ever been in a business or maybe with law enforcement, we have a book of what they call the SOP book. And it's your standard operating procedure. And this is how you will do things. This is how you respond when this situation comes up. Jesus does not have a standard SOP book. He deals with each individual separately and individually. And I think sometimes we're confused by that. We see the official son healed immediately, even at a distance, and yet we see another blind man that has to be led out of the city and have spit put on him, and it just seems like, well, why the difference? What made this situation different? And I'll be honest, I suspect that there are probably more than 1,000 good reasons for those differences. And I want to just explore a couple of them, because at least one of them applies to me directly. You've all heard about my experience as a child, my dad and his abuse. And one of the things that I needed desperately was healing. I was angry, I was hurt, I was in pain because of what had happened. But to be honest with you, while I wanted the healing, while I sought that peace that the Bible told me was freely available to all Christians, I did not have that peace. And for many years, I would question God. Why? Why can't I have? Why do these people get that peace and I don't? Well, as I grew in understanding, as I started to get things explained to me in a better way, was that, frankly, I wasn't ready to be healed yet. One of the difficult criteria for my healing was for me to let go of my anger. I could not find healing until I let go of that self-righteous ability to say, I was hurt, and therefore I have a right to be mad. I have a right to feel bad. I have a right. Until I was ready to surrender that, I couldn't be healed. You know, it's sad. I've talked to people, and people would ask me, have you forgiven your father? Yep, I did. I've said the words, no problem. But I would frequently say it with clenched fists. And I've talked to people, I said, hey, you've forgiven the situation. You know, we'll talk about a situation that was hurt. And I said, have you forgiven him? And it'll be the same thing. It's almost looking in a mirror. I'll see them clench their fist and go, yes, I've said I've forgiven him. That's it. I'm done. I've forgiven him. It's over. Forget it. And it's like, no, I don't think you have. You are not ready to be healed yet because you're not willing to surrender that pain. You're not willing to surrender that self-righteous indignation. You are, in fact, holding up your own healing and doing harm to yourself and others because you're just not ready to be healed. When you let go, and I did eventually do that, let go, it became so much more beautiful. That peace that those other people had, I suddenly started to see the glimpses of. I suddenly started to experience a peace and a release. I started to feel healing happening in my life. But God could not heal me until I was ready to say, Lord, I want to be healed. I'm willing to surrender what went wrong in my life to you and say, take it away. I'm willing to say, the people that hurt me, I'm willing to let go. I no longer want to see them held to account. Because, you know, there's a part of you, when somebody wrongs you, I want them busted. I can remember one time sitting in a squad car, and I saw somebody blow by. I was sitting in a cemetery, just kind of out of the way, and nobody was seeing me. Sure enough, somebody come by and blew the doors off of another person, and just literally almost caused a wreck. Well, up go my lights, and I pull them over. The next day, the curses that went around went, as soon as that person went around me, he goes, "Where's a cop when you need him?" And the next thing I know, I see all these lights. And they saw their justice. The guy got a ticket. And they are like, "Yes, I like that." Well, as a Christian, sometimes I'm that way. I want my justice. I want my solution. I want to see punishment on the person who hurt me. My friends, that isn't always going to be the case. And for your health and for your benefit, it is essential that you give up that right to demand justice and surrender it to God and say, "Lord, what you do with that person is up to you. What you do for me, I prefer to have healing. I want to be made new." When that happens, my friends, healing can take place. I had what we didn't know back then, what I know now. I had PTSD. I probably still do. But I can tell you that PTSD is not something you get healed from. You can't take a couple pills and be cured of PTSD. It takes years of counseling. It takes years of right thinking. And it takes years of taking different mentality. And some people never do recover. I've seen so many victims that were not able to come back. When I was a police officer, so many Vietnam vets I found living under bridges because they could not come back into society. They could not deal with the public. Because of the PTSD that they exhibited in the war, they were not able to. And some of those people died, never getting treatment, never getting healing for their PTSD. On the same token, I work with Wings of Refuge, who take women who have been equally traumatized, who equally have PTSD, and I watch as that organization walks them through the healing process and watch the PTSD slip away. You may ask if I still have PTSD, and I'll be honest, I can't tell you if I do. There are still remnants of it in my life, but there was a point in time not too long ago where you did not come up behind me if I didn't know you were there. I have decked more than my share of people because they surprised me when I didn't think somebody was there because of PTSD. You do that, you see that in a lot of folks that have anxiety, who cannot live in normal circumstances. It just is part of their nature. But it is one of those things. Unless I'm willing to accept healing, unless I'm willing to say, "Lord, I need to change, help me change," I can't change. I may feel justified and rationalize and say, "Lord, I deserve to be healed." And believe me, I don't believe there's a person in the world that does not deserve healing. But unless I'm willing to accept it, unless I'm willing to reach out and say, "Lord, I'm willing to do what it needs to be done," and that means letting go of things that I don't want to let go of. The truth of it is, I meet people every day who will never let go of the things that have hurt them. And some of them are old people who was hurt at childhood, and for all their life, they've gripped that pain as their self-righteous. I deserve to feel badly because of what happened to me. Not arguing, you're 100% correct. It is terrible what happened. But unless you're willing to let go, God cannot heal you, because what you have to do is you have to forgive to be forgiven. Unfortunately, some people will, like I say, never do that because they're justified. And so often, unfortunately, some of those people never even realize what they're doing to themselves. But the good news is, if, and I put that word, that big word, if, up in bold letters, if I am willing to surrender that to God, healing can take place. I can see healing, and I have seen it in my life. I have seen it in other people's lives. And you know what? When you see the healing take place, you begin, at least I do, look back at my life and go, why did I hold on to that for so long? Why was I miserable for so long when I could have had the peace that I have now 20, 30, 40 years ago? Why did I take so long? It seems laughable. And yet I see myself and others doing the same thing every day. The good news is Jesus is waiting. He's patiently waiting for you to be willing to heal. But I also want to tell you that you cannot categorize all pain and all healing and all illnesses in one category. There are people, and there's an old joke that a lady was blind, and somebody came up to her and said, you know, if you had enough faith, you could be healed. And it really bothered her because she was a Christian lady, and she said, you know, I feel like I have a lot of faith, but I'm still blind. And basically, she was confronting a pastor and said, what do I say when something says like that? And she goes, the next time someone says that, punch him in the nose. So if you had more faith, that wouldn't have hurt. My friends, to say that someone isn't getting healed because they're not ready, it may be accurate. It was in my case, but it's not always. So to categorize all non-healings as, well, you just don't have enough faith, or you're just not ready, is not always the case. I've talked about Johnny Erickson Tada before. A teenage girl, age 16 or 17, dove into a lake and didn't come back up. They dove down, rescued her, and she has been a paraplegic all of her life. She has prayed for healing. She is now in her 70s, I believe, and she is still in a wheelchair. Not only is she still in a wheelchair, she's also a breast cancer survivor. She deals with severe pain every day. And to suggest that Johnny Erickson Tada doesn't have enough faith, or that she's not ready to be healed, is insulting and foolish. There is a reason God hasn't chosen to heal Johnny Erickson Tada. Don't ask me what it is, because I don't know. But I think if we look at things, we understand that God does not always heal on our schedule. Paul, one of the greatest writers in the New Testament, he wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, did 3 missionary tours, did more great works. I would say single-handedly probably more responsible for the Christian church's foundation than any other person. But he was afflicted with what he called a thorn in his side. And he prayed 3 times for that thorn to be removed. He prayed for healing. Paul was ready. Whatever that thorn was bothered him immensely. And he was more than ready to be. He was very ready to be healed from that. But God's answer was, my grace is sufficient. In other words, Paul suffered throughout the rest of his life with that thorn in his side. And we can talk about it later, but there are 5 or 6 different opinions of what that thorn was. God's answer is, you're going to suffer for the rest of your life, but my grace is sufficient. I suspect at some point Johnny Erickson Tada received that same message. You will spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair, suffering, but my grace is sufficient. That healing will come, but it will come in heaven. It will come in a time when you're made renewed. Why does God delay that healing? I cannot tell you. But I will tell you this. As a Christian, I am called to trust God. Now, trust is something, I don't know about you, but with growing up the way I did, I have what's called trust issues. I'm not a trusting individual. I have been called by some a little bit naive, because from what I used to be to what I am now, people actually think sometimes I haven't been accused of being naive because I trust too much. And I laugh whenever I hear that, because I remember people when I was a law enforcement going, Baki doesn't trust anybody. And that was very much the truth. I did not trust anybody, including God. There was no trust. I wasn't able to surrender to God because I wasn't able to trust God. If you're in the Army and a general walks up and says, here are your orders, private, you don't go, well, General, I want you to explain this to me. Why do you want me to do this? Why do you want me, why is this part of my orders this way? I think the orders would be better if you did it in this order instead. That doesn't happen in the Army. It doesn't happen in Christianity either. I either trust God or I do not. Now, I will tell you, trust is something that has to be developed. It is still being developed in me. But you cannot be a Christian and get to second guess everything that God does. There are things in the Scripture that will tell me things God allows in my life will work out to my good, even though I can't see it. Romans 8:28 reads, and we know that for all things, for all those who love God, all things work together for the good of those who are called to His purpose. Now, when I was a teenage boy, I read Romans 8:28 and I laughed. Because I'm going, you know what? I'm living with a crazy man who wants to kill me. Tell me how that's going to work out to my good. I lived in fear of my life for many, many, many years. Even after I left the house, my father told me, you ever speak about what goes on in this house, I will kill you. He had a rifle. I always kept expecting it to being shot. I knew what the Bible told me, that all things work together for the good. But I sure couldn't see it at the time. Now I'm here in 2022 at age 66, and I'm here to tell you, I see Romans 8:28 played out. I see the good that came from that terrible experience. I have an ability to identify with people who have been in similar situations. I have an ability to say, even though you can't see past the pain right now, I can tell you there is another place. There is healing. There is hope. So much of this world today lacks hope. So many people look around and they see war and they see inflation and they see all the terrible things and they go, it's hopeless. There is no hope. My friends, as long as we are Christians, there is not only hope, there's exuberant hope. We serve the God of the universe. We have a God who can and will heal all things. Maybe not in the time frame that I would like it. Be honest with you, I'm getting old and my body hurts and I'd like to have no pain. But the reality is, I've abused this body over years and years and years. I've not taken care of it. I've done things it shouldn't have had done. Because of my own foolishness, I am suffering pain from that. Well, some people can say, well, it's your own fault. And I go, yeah, it is. Other people, like Johnny Erickson Tada, are suffering pain and it was not their fault. I can't tell you why God chooses to heal some, but not all. But I can tell you that as Christians, healing is coming. It may not be until the day you put me in a coffin. One day, there was an old joke. An old timer says, when I get out of bed, I always check When I sit up, if I'm in pain, I know I'm still on this earth. He says, if I sit up and I don't hurt anymore, I'm going to go, I'm in heaven. And there is some reality to that. It's the idea that says, I know I am going somewhere where there will be no more pain, no more tears, no more sorrow. Everything that has ever been done to us, everything that we've ever suffered. And I will grant you that quoting Romans 8:28 to individuals who've been traumatized through child abuse, rape, through war, may seem a little bit superfluous, because it's hard to tell someone in the midst of their anguish that, you know what, God can make something good out of this. There is a point for us as Christians to come alongside those individuals and share in their pain, to share in their grief. And yes, Romans 8:28 needs to be brought up, but it is, I guarantee you, not the first thing that needs to be brought up. We must acknowledge the pain that people are in. We must acknowledge that there are so many people out there that need healing. And the fact that some of that healing may take years, decades. For me, it has taken decades to see God's work done. And in some cases, we'll see. I think some of the healing will take place when I die. If you're experiencing delayed healing in your life, the first question you have to ask is, am I ready? Will I surrender what is causing that pain and destruction in my life to God? Am I willing to take my desire to see justice and place that in God's hands? That's a hard thing to do, my friends. Speaking from personal experience. But it is a necessity that will keep me from being healed. I can't tell you how many years I spent doing just that. Refusing to be healed because I was so sure that what was done to me was so wrong. And I was not mistaken about that fact. What was done to me was very wrong. But I had to surrender my right and my desire for justice, for restitution, and say, Lord, I just want to be healed. Before that was able to. And for the others, it is, in fact, a point that we realize that some of this healing is going to take time. It's going to take years. Like I said, I'm 66. I started this process 30-some years ago. And to be honest with you, I would have thought. I remember going into the counselor for the first time when I was finally told I really needed to go to a counselor. And I was like, nah, I don't need a counselor. I don't need a counselor. I was a police officer. I had perfect control over everything, and I just, I didn't need a counselor. But after so many people kind of confronted me with it, I thought, well, I'll go see a counselor. And I sat down and we talked over my past, and she says, yeah, I think you need counseling. I said, so what's this going to take, 2, 3 weeks? And she just laughed. And as I look back now, I see why she laughed, because, like I said, that was some 35 years ago. You know what? I could tell you that the healing is still taking place. I've used that onion analogy before, where you forgive like peeling an onion. You take a layer off, and then sooner or later you look at that onion again, and there's another layer that's dried out. And you peel that onion one layer at a time. Forgiveness comes from taking the door off your heart that's marked forgiveness. When I accepted Christ, I had this nice front door in my heart that said forgiveness on it. And when Jesus said, I'll forgive you your sins, I opened that door a crack and said, sneak in quick. And I'm going to shut this door again, because I'm not willing to forgive anybody else. What Jesus is saying, I want to come into your heart. I want to go in that door. I want to forgive you of your sins. And then once I'm inside there and I've forgiven you your sins, you and me are going to take that door off its hinges, and we're going to burn the door. Because we're not going to hold on. We're not going to hold on to the things that keep you from being forgiven. Today, too many of us are seeking healing, and we can't see the big picture. If your healing is being delayed by yourself, then my friends, the only thing that's stopping you is to take and say, Lord, give me the understanding. Show me how. Help me, because I need help just letting go. If, on the other hand, your healing is being delayed, like Paul's or Johnny Erickson taught us, stop asking why and saying, Lord, help me through this. I do not get the right to question my God. I will. I trust me. At 3 o'clock in the morning when you can't sleep and there's pain, you go, Lord, why? I really am tired. I'm really exhausted, and this pain is not letting me sleep. Why can't I at least get a good night's sleep? You ask those questions of God. What God is going to respond to you is, my grace is sufficient. Are you willing to trust me? Are you willing to hold on to what I promised you, even when you cannot see it? We see in the Bible time and time again, Abraham was promised a people so multiple that even the sands of the sea would not be able to count all of his descendants. He was in his 90s when that promise was made, and he had yet to have a child. It seemed pretty laughable for God's promise to be fulfilled. And yet, in 2022, the descendants of Abraham, through Ishmael, which are the Muslim Arab world, and through the Jews, and as Paul would say, through faith, the Christians, the Gentile Christians, which includes you and me, are all considered sons of Abraham. And I'm here to tell you, yes, we are more than the numbers of the sands of the sea. Trusting God for healing is essential. I cannot and should not expect healing if I'm not willing to trust God to give that healing to me. There are reasons why some delayed healing happens. Do not come to me and tell me to explain it to you. I can give you examples, but I cannot tell you why. And I suggest that every situation could be different. But I will tell you that if you are waiting for healing and it is not happening, you must trust God. If you are still waiting, don't give up hope. God does promise to give healing to all who seek it. And there's another thing that God cannot do. As I said before, God cannot lie. God cannot break his own promises. If God says, I will heal you, you will be healed. Unfortunately for some of us, it may be heaven before we see some of that healing. Some of us will see instantaneous healing. And sometimes when you're waiting for the delayed healing, it's easy to get jealous and say, well, saw him do it for this person, why doesn't he do it for me? And again, that goes back to that private questioning the general. I can't answer for God. I'm not going to make excuses for God. But I can tell you that if God puts you through delayed healing, Romans 8:28 is in fact true. And I would honestly tell you that if time travel were possible, and I could go back in time and rescue that little boy named Rick Bachman in the early 60s when he was only 1 or 2 years old, and take him away from that abusive parent and give him a different life, that boy would appreciate it so much. But the man, Rick Bachman, at age 66, standing before you, would say, if you gave me the choice to be taken out of that or to remain there, suffer as I did, and see the benefits that God produced from that, I would have stayed. I would stay because, yes, it was painful. Yes, it was definitely not a fun thing. But what I see resulting from that, Romans 8:28 says all things, not some things, all things work together for the good of them that love the Lord. My friends, the worst thing in your life as a Christian can and will be used as a blessing to you and others. And my friends, I would not give up that blessing, even if I could. So if you're waiting, hang in there, keep trusting, because it is coming. Thank you.